In Bhagavad Gita, we have a series of verses that describe the occupation for those in Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaisha, and Shudra positions. What Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita for the Vaisha, there's three main occupations. Krishi, Goraksha, Vanijam, Vaisha Karma Swabhavajam. So we see Balaram carrying a plow, and the plow is used for Krishi, for production of agricultural products or grains. Krishna is carrying his flute for calling the cows, and Vanijam, the marketing of the products from the land and from the cows. These three occupations for the Vaisha. And Krishna's position is with the flute, and Balaram's position is with the plow. We often see Balaram wearing this blue dhoti. Krishna likes the yellow dhoti. Balaram likes this blue one. And commonly he's described like that. Even there's a nice verse in Lagu Bhagavatamrita where it says that his dhoti is like the color of a monsoon cloud, and his body is like the color of fresh ground camphor. He makes his appearance on the full moon of the first of the 4 months of the rainy season. Shravan is the first of the 4 months, and on the full moon night of the month of Shravan, that's when Balaram makes his appearance. And 8 days later in the month of Bhadra is when Krishna makes his appearance. So here's some details about his birth. One of his names is Rohini Nandana, because he was the son of Rohini. And Rohini was one of the 18 wives. Vasudeva had 18 wives, and Rohini was one of them. When Devaki married Vasudeva, we're going to see that shortly. Devaki had a number of sisters, 8 sisters total, and she was the chief amongst those 8 sisters. So 8 and 10, you get 18. So there were a number of different wives from different places. Rohini was one of them. And after 3 months of her pregnancy, Rohini was sent by Vasudeva to Gokul to be under Nanda's care. The Bhagavatam says that he sent all of his wives at this time to Gokul, other than Devaki, because there was this pledge to Kamsa. Then the 8th child of Devaki was also Balaram. So the pregnancy of Rohini before she went to Gokul was Balaram. The next slide will explain this. So there's 2 Balarams. In the womb of Rohini, who then went to Gokul, the 7th child of Devaki was Balaram. 2 Balarams. You'll see. 2 Balarams. And then before Balaram was born, Krishna arranged for Balaram to be transferred to the womb of Rohini. That means the 2 Balarams became 1 Balaram. And there's some detail we'll see shortly. Now, after what everyone thought was a miscarriage of Devaki for the seventh child, some time passed. And Balaram remained in the womb of Rohini for 16 months. That's a long time, waiting for Krishna's appearance. And 8 days before Krishna appeared, Balaram appeared as the son of Rohini, thus Rohini Nandana. Now this is described in Krishna Sandarbha, where the first Balaram was Sankarshana. Sankarshana is the Purusha incarnation. Those of you that know Lord Chaitanya's teachings to Sanatana Goswami, there's 24 names of Vishnu depending upon the position of the conch club disc, and lotus. One of those 24 is Sankarshan. It's that Sankarshan that entered into the womb of Rohini. Chronologically next, Balaram, the original Sankarshan of the spiritual world of Goloka, entered into the womb of Devaki. This is from Krishna Sandarbha. He makes this statement based upon some scriptural references. Then, so now we have two Balarams. One is Sankarshan in the womb of Rohini. The second is the original Sankarshan or Balaram in the womb of Devaki. When within Rohini's womb, Sankarshan and Balaram joined to become a single Balaram. Thus, Balaram Sankarshan appeared after 16 months in the womb of Rohini. And Jiva Goswami explains they were actually almost the same age because there's some other ideas, without going into those other ideas, but he said it's not correct because their maturing as children was around the same time. They were crawling at the same time, they were toddling at the same time, they were doing everything at the same time, which means they were very, very close in age to one another. So their name-giving ceremony was conducted by Gargamuni in a private place, as we see, in a cowshed, so as to not attract the attention of Kamsa. And he gave 3 names. Not very well spaced on the page here. 3 names for Balaram. This child, son of Rohini, will give all happiness to his relatives and friends by his transcendental qualities. Therefore, he will be known as Rama. I don't know why you're doing that, because the font isn't even proper. The second name he gave, Bala, because he will manifest extraordinary bodily strength, he will also be known as Bala. And the third name, Sankarshan, because he unites 2 families. That's Vasudev's family, that's his father, and the family of Nanda Maharaj, which is from a different family line. They're related, actually. He'll be known as Sankarshan. Here's some ancestry. All of these family members are from the Yadu dynasty. That's a long way, way back. And Yadu's descendants came down to Maharaj Devamidha. And Devamidha had 2 sons. Devamidha had a Vaisha wife and a Kshatriya wife. With his Vaisha wife, the son that was born was Parjanya. And Parjanya, together with his wife, had 5 sons. the eldest of the 5 sons was Upananda. The middle son was Nanda, and then the other 3 brothers. So that Parjanya is related to Shurasena. Parjanya and Shurasena are brothers, different mothers, but brothers for the same father. And Shurasena had 10 sons, Vasudeva and Devabhaga. Devabhaga was a brother of Vasudeva, and his son was Uddhava. So Krishna and Uddhava were cousins, first cousins. And there were 5 daughters, and Pritha was one of those 5 daughters. The daughter Pritha was given to adopt by a friend of King Shurasena who had no children. The king of Shurasena that had no children, his name was Kuntiboja. So Pritha, in the care of Kuntiboja, became known as Kunti. So Pritha and Kunti are the same person. And it's that way that Kunti, being the mother of the Pandavas, and Krishna, who is the son of Vasudeva, their first cousins. So Balaram, being born as the son of Vasudeva and Devaki, but we also know Vasudeva and Rohini, so they're cousin brothers or brothers. On the other side, again from the Yadu descendants, there's a very principal descendant named Vrishni. And Vrishni had many sons, and they're known as the Bhoja dynasty, the Madhu dynasty, and Dasharha dynasty, and the Arha dynasty, and the Kukura dynasty, and the Andaka. And the Andaka dynasty, there was a king named Ahuka who had 2 sons, Ugrasena and Devaka. And Devaki was one of the daughters of Devaka. And Kamsa was one of the sons of Ugrasena. Now, we hear that Kamsa and Devaki were brother and sister, but they weren't exactly brother and sister. They were cousins. But brother and sister. So, because that question sometimes, how does Ugrasena and Kamsa fit into all of this? They're from the same Yadu dynasty, and actually also from Vrishni, because the Devamida line is also from Vrishni, but it splits over here because they're different fathers and the ancestral line, and Ugrasena is from that line. Okay, that's just a little background on ancestry. Now, many places, there's Balaram with a little tiny plow. Many places it says he is the source of all spiritual power, Bala. We'll hear some quotes about he's not just physically strong, he's the source of all spiritual power. And as such, by spiritual power, he's the original spiritual master. We're going to hear some references. Here's Nayam Atmabala. I think that's Rinena Labhya. I wish I could see the original Sanskrit. Prabhupada writes this in Krishna book, chapter 2, is the demigods offering prayers to Krishna within the womb of Dev, while he's still in the womb of Devaki, chapter 2, Krishna book, and chapter 2 of Canto 2, so of Canto 10. In that chapter, Prabhupada writes, one cannot attain the supreme perfection, clean platform of self-realization without being sufficiently favored by Balaram. Bala does not mean physical strength. One must have the spiritual strength which is infused by Balaram or Sankarsana. And the same understanding is presented in Canto 1, chapter 11, in these two verses that are Prabhupada's purport. In the Vedas is it enjoined that no one can know the Supreme Lord without being favored by Baladev. Bala means spiritual strength, not physical. Some less intelligent persons interpret Bala as the strength of the body. But no one can have spiritual realization by physical strength. Physical strength ends with the physical body. But spiritual strength follows the spirit soul to the next transmigration, and therefore the strength obtained by Baladev is never wasted. The strength is eternal, and thus Baladev is the original spiritual master of all devotees. I want to just take a look at the correct pronunciation. Nayam Atma Bala Hinena Labhyaha, from Katha Upanishad. Here's another reference, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila chapter 6. Bhakta Abhimana Mula Shri Balarame Se Bhave Anugata Tanra Angsha Gane. The key phrase here is Bhakta Abhiman, or the sentiment of a devotee, or thinking oneself as a devotee. The very root source of thinking oneself as a devotee is Balaram. Sri Balarame. Bhakta Abhiman. So Balaram is the mula, the source of the sentiment of servitude. Now what's the identity of living entities? Living entities are also servants, are they not? Here's a phrase that's found in Bhagavad Gita 13:13. That's a reference from Padma Purana that's quoted in many places. Dasa bhuta harir eva nanyas yaiva kadachana. The living entities are eternally in the service of the Supreme Lord. The soul is never servant of anyone else. Dasa bhuta. Dasa bhuto. Hari, or unto Hari. The living entities are eternally in the service of Hari. So we're eternally in the service of Hari, and the root of all Bhakta Abhiman is Balaram. We're intimately connected with Balaram eternally. The very nature of who we are. The other two references that are presented here, one is Govinda Bhasya, that's Baladev Vidyabhusan's commentary on Vedanta Sutra, where Vedanta Sutra is explaining the jiva, and Baladev explains what Vedanta Sutra is saying, by making this reference from Padma Purana. The living entity, by constitution, is eternally Krishna's servant. And the same understanding, exact same understanding, is there in Paramatma Sandarbha, where the ontology of the soul is described. The same phrase, Dasa Bhuta Harer Eva, where he also makes an additional statement later in Paramatma Sandarbha, the same section, the ontology of the soul. He explains what the soul is, what the soul isn't, and then explains that the essence of the soul, the Swarupa Lakshana, the primary characteristics of the soul, is they're eternally engaged in service to Krishna, or Paramatma, Eka, Sheshatvam. The quality of being dependent completely on the Lord for all acts. Same idea. We're dependent servants. Now, that's forgotten, and persons are thinking something else. But that tendency that we have of who we are, the root of it is Balarama. And he's the source of strength to do all that, so he's a really important person for us to connect with. Very important person for us to connect with. The original spiritual master. And that's the function of spiritual master, is to awaken that remembrance of what we've forgotten. What have we forgotten? We've forgotten who we are. We're thinking something else. So removing the misconceptions and reviving the proper conception, that's the spiritual master function. That's the Balarama function. He's the original spiritual master. Now in his pastimes with Krishna, he's so attached to Krishna that at times he even forgets himself. This is one example, is here. When Kamsa sent the Baka demon to kill Krishna, Baka was way on the north side of Vrindavan, not far from Govardhan Hill. And when the boys came along, they saw this giant creature. They didn't know what it was. But he was just waiting to swallow Krishna. So Krishna obliged him. As we see on the left side, Krishna allowed himself to be put into the beak of Baka, but not beyond his beak. He would let him swallow him. And when Balaram and the cowherd boys saw Krishna in that predicament, he fainted. He lost his external consciousness. Now he's omniscient, but it happened for the pleasure of Krishna and for his pleasure because his attachment for Krishna was so great. It's a transcendental emotion overwhelmed by Yogamaya's potency. Then of course Krishna escaped, and Balaram and the cowherd boys came to external consciousness, and there we see them whacking Baka with sticks while Krishna is bifurcating his beak. He plays such an important role in, of course, all of Krishna's pastimes, but some very wonderful ones in Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. On the day, another day when Krishna was in difficulty, in two pastimes he was in difficulty, because he was in the coils of the Kaliya serpent, but that day Balaram wasn't there. The whole day he wasn't there. Well, almost of the day he wasn't there. So that Krishna could have this pastime of being in difficulty, because Balaram could have rescued him, but Balaram wasn't there. And when Balaram heard, a messenger went back to Nandagram to tell everybody, oh, Krishna's in the coils of the Kaliya serpent. Nanda was chivalrous, Mother Jasoda was crying, and Balaram was laughing. Because he understood Krishna was just having fun. No anxiety at all. In fact, he stopped Mother Yasoda from entering into the Kaliya lake forcibly. So he has an important role to play in Krishna's pastimes. On another occasion, Balaram wasn't there. When the Brahma Vimohan Leela took place. Now, and for one whole year, Balaram was unaware that all the calves and all the cowherd boys were Krishna. Till towards the end of the year. Then Yogamaya curtain started to pull back and he started to see things that he wasn't seeing the rest of the time. And eventually he got to the point where, let's just sit down, they can do what they need to do. Then he started to understand, wait a minute, these aren't just cowherd boys, these are Krishna's expansions. And he was appreciating how wonderful are your potencies. Even I didn't recognize what was happening. Along with his plow, sometimes we see Balaram pictured with an instrument that's used for controlling the oxen. That part that's the narrow part in the middle goes over the back of the hump of the oxen, and so the plow can be fastened to either end. I don't know what the name of the instrument is, but it's used in agriculture. When Balaram is outside of Vrindavan, we often find him with a club and his plow. He likes his plow. Here's a nice painting of Krishna and Balaram in Vrindavan together. In the background, of course, the cows and the cowherd boys. This painting is in the room that I stay at the sannyas ashram. And it has special meaning for me. I'll just very quickly, it's a longer version, but a short version is, a few years ago, I was also in Houston for Balaram's appearance day, and I was absorbed in that painting. It happened again this year, but it was very special one particular year. And as I was chanting japa, just sitting, looking at this painting, I was calling to Balaram for spiritual strength. And so as I was chanting the Hari Rama portion of the Maha Mantra, it just got stronger and stronger and stronger. And I could feel reciprocation between Balaram and calling for Balaram for spiritual strength. That the person and the name are not different. Then came the Krishna part of the mantra. So Krishna is all attractive. So calling upon Krishna to attract. It makes the Maha Mantra chanting something far more personal. I'm not going into it so much because of time and circumstance. Did I show you this? Or was it just only seeing it here?
You were seeing it there.
I was seeing it here, but not on the screen.
Yeah.
Oh, fully. Okay, well, there's the painting. And the resolution's better on my computer than on your screen, but it's okay. Those who like to hear Srila Prabhupada's recorded lectures are very familiar with this phrase, Krita Punya Punja. This is spoken by Shukadeva Goswami in chapter 12. In chapter 12, the age of the cowherd boys is getting a little older, because in chapter 8 is that chapter where Krishna swallows dirt, so he's much younger. and many other things happen in between. But when it comes to chapter 12, this is still towards the beginning of chapter 12, but Shukadeva Goswami is experiencing it and then expressing how fortunate are the cowherd boys, because he's the personality Godhead. He is considered by the impersonal, as the impersonal Brahman by great sages, as the personality Godhead by devotees, and a product of material nature by ordinary men. Those are those first three verses. Maya Shatanam Naradara Kena. But the cowherd boys, they're just playing with him. He's the impersonal Brahman for sages. He's the personality Godhead for devotees. He is just an ordinary person for materialists. And the cowherd boys are playing with him. And Krita Punya Punja. How many pious activities, many, many, many pious activities have they performed to have this wonderful opportunity? During Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, most of the demons that were killed by Krishna, but two of the demons were demons that were killed by Balaram. And the first of those two demons killed by Balaram was? Who's this? Denakasura. Tell me what you know about Denakasura.
He was a demon who was guarding Kamsa's nectar.
Well, there were trees that had very special fruits. Palm trees that had palm fruits. They're very fragrant and very sweet. But he couldn't reach them, so he didn't let anybody in. But the cowherd boys, when they smelled and then saw the fruits, they asked Krishna in several verses, please, get the fruits. Can you help us get the fruits? But there's a problem. There's Denaka. He's keeping everybody out. So not Krishna, but Balaram went first. And Balaram started shaking the trees, right? And the palm fruits started falling. And Denaka became really angry. Who's in my palm forest? And he came charging out, and a few passes later, Balaram finished him. Twirled him around, tossed him at the top of the tree. Then Denaka had many buddies who were assisting, so they came charging, and then Krishna and Balaram both finished them all, and the cowherd boys had a nice feast. They were very happy. Well, here's something that I want to read, but you have a copy of, you're reading it later. Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written in two places, Chaitanya Shikshamrita, and in Krishna Samhita, he describes the killing of the demons in Vrindavan are significant in that they're meditating upon these pastimes help us become free from obstacles on the path of bhakti. But the two demons that were killed by Balaram, there's specifically something the devotee himself or herself has to deal with. Balaram will give the strength, but the demon represents a certain obstacle on the bhakti path. And I'm just going to read it. This is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's words, translated, of course. The demon who assumed the form of an ass and was killed by Balaram represents gross intellect and complete ignorance. of pure knowledge, pure bhakti, and the pure identity of the soul. All of these originate from material intelligence. That's this ass-like condition. Arise from material intelligence, lack of spiritual intuition, and idiotic foolishness. This condition, which must be destroyed, is completely contrary to spiritual knowledge. Subtle discrimination is extremely important for Vaishnavas. Those who invent social distinctions and preach the unbreakable principles of Vaishnavism while breaking them themselves to suit their needs are said to possess such gross discrimination. This gross discrimination takes the form of the ass, of Dhenuka. The ass cannot eat the sweet palm tree fruits, and he opposes others' attempts to eat them. The sweet palm tree fruits are indicating the fruit of mature Vaishnavism. So since they can't taste, they don't want others to taste. That's the Dhenuka propensity. The purport is that the previous acharyas of the authorized sampradayas have written many spiritual literatures which people with gross discrimination neither understand nor allow others to see. As like devotees who are simply interested in the regular principles and under the control of gross discrimination are unable to attain a higher platform. Vaishnava principles are so unlimitedly exalted that those who simply remain entangled in the regulative process without endeavoring to understand the science of attachment are comparable to ordinary fruitive workers. Therefore, until the ass Dhenukasura is killed, one cannot advance in the science of Vaishnavism. Far out. I'll say it again. The demons that Krishna kills, Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes, it's a way that Krishna has of helping the sadhaka overcome obstacles on the bhakti path. Like, for example, the first demon that's killed is Putana. And Putana represents false teachers and false teachings. And Krishna helps free the devotee from false preachers or teachers and teachings by his act of killing Putana right away. Not that's if one's sincere, but Krishna can protect one. That's the Putana killing. And then each of the other demons represent some internal or external obstacle on the bhakti path, and Krishna helps remove. But these two, here's his words, all the obstacles represented by the demons whom Balaram kills can be removed by the efforts of the devotee himself. Now, efforts empowered with spiritual strength by Balaram. So one has to be clear what this obstacle is for oneself, and to overcome it, one requires the strength of Balaram. If one is making that endeavor to recognize and overcome such a tendency, Balaram will give his strength. But it's a very specific effort that must be undertaken by the devotee. And who was the other demon that Balaram killed? Dhenukasura and? Starts with a P. Pralambasura. What do we know about Pralambasura?
Krishna was riding on him. There was a race.
Not Krishna, Balaram.
I think it was.
He posed himself as a cowherd boy because he knew that the cowherd boys had games. one of the games was wrestling. And he was a little intimidated by Krishna, so he decided to play a cowherd boy and wrestle with Balaram. And when he would lose to Balaram, then he would carry Balaram on his shoulders and then carry Balaram away and kill him. That was his murder plot. Only when he got bigger and bigger and bigger, Balaram realized he's not just a cowherd boy taking me for a ride. He's a big demon. So with one sacco, Balaram punched him in the side of the head and he fell down to the ground, finished. Pralambasura. A demon killed by Balaram. But here's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes about Balaram and Pralambasura. Pralambasura appeared as a gopa. He represents a sham of devotion while secretly maintaining a greedy lust for women, money, worship, and position. Killed only by Balaram, this hypocrisy must be given up. The impersonalist desire to merge the soul in the impersonal Brahman. In other words, searching for the liberation of complete merging is the defect of, quote, stealing the self. Stealing the self is the Palamba stealing Balaram. Stealing the self, because there's no happiness in this state. Neither the living entity nor the Lord gain anything from this. If one believes the impersonalist philosophy, then he must accept this material world as false. One then denounces Brahman as non-different and gradually develops doubts about the basis of Brahman. If one becomes deeply absorbed in this topic, he is compelled to accept meaningless nescience and the non-existence of the living entities. Thus all of mankind's endeavors and considerations become meaningless, like existentialism and other philosophies like that. Sometimes this philosophy enters amongst the Vaishnavas in the form of Pralambasura to spread serious anarthas in the form of, quote, stealing the self or denying one's identity as an eternal servant of Krishna. So we are Sheshatvam. Dasabhuta Harer Eva. So we are. So those who cover and conceal and hide, take away, kill, steal the self, the true identity of who we really are by any means, that's Pralambasura. This is a serious obstacle for Vaishnavas on the bhakti path. So there are printouts of what I just read. We can distribute them. And we're almost done. There's a nice painting of Balaram. Of course, we see right next to Balaram, there's Krishna. Here he's with a blue dhoti and a blue turban and a nice garland. And he's always engaged in Krishna service. Because he's the bhakti abhiman. He's the mula. He's the root of that disposition of wanting to be in Krishna's service, which is our disposition in the healthy state. So we need Balaram's strength. And to engage in service, that's the beginning of awakening of deeper understandings of our spiritual identity. Beyond just, we're meant for serving Krishna, but that's the starting point. Because the material condition is we've forgotten that. So he's the original spiritual master. He helps revive by teachings and by his example and by his wonderful pastimes. Removing obstacles that stand in the way of our remembering our position as Krishna's servant. So this was intended, there's a longer version, but we got started late for technical reasons. This was intended to be presented for the Sunday class at the temple, but somehow couldn't be there. So let's see if there's some discussion.
So Raj, we all know about how Krishna disappeared from this material world. How about Lord Balarama, how he left this world?
It's really fascinating. You've not heard that one before? You probably, I'll say you probably will remember as I say it. It was by the shore of the sea, and from his mouth came Anantashesh, and he entered onto Anantashesh, and Anantashesh took off to the spiritual world. Now Anantashesh is his expansion, but the expansion came from his mouth. I mean, it could have come from anywhere, but it came from his mouth and carried him away. That's how he departed. Pretty dramatic. And that was just before Krishna departed. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj, for nice discourse. I just heard this presentation. In Bakasura pastime, when Krishna went into the beak of Bakasura demon, Lord Balarama got fainted, right? And when a Kaliya pastime was going on, Lord Balarama was laughing, So,
Different moods.
different.
That's all. It's like it's for me. It's really easy. There's waves of a river, and sometimes, and then there's some other waves that come and hit that wave, and some other waves that hit those two waves, and then the waves subside, and the river keeps flowing, and then further down the river, the waves are down, and some other waves are up, and it's just variegatedness. The thread is loving service to Krishna. And at different times there's different moods of that loving service to Krishna. And that in the Kaliya Leela, his Balaram's omniscience wasn't obscured. And the Bakasura Leela, his love for Krishna became so intensified, he forgot Krishna's omnipotence. It's just moods of love, like waves in a river.
Thank you.
You have something. Gopi? Gopi? Okay. You have something.
So, I've got 3 questions. So Lord Balaram, we just heard in detail his mood of service to Lord Krishna. That sometimes we see that Lord Balaram is externally or apparently he's enjoying with gopis. He has his own set of gopis whom he's enjoying. Can you say something how that is enhancing his mood of service to Krishna?
Krishna asked him to do that. There are many gopis that were unable to participate, so give them happiness.
Okay.
Before he left Dwarka, Krishna requested.
And the other question I have is, Srimati Radharani also helps us in our devotional service, and Lord Balaram as Adi Guru is helping us in our devotional service. My current understanding is that Lord Balaram is helping us with sadhana bhakti or that aspect of bhakti, and Srimati Radharani is kind of raga bhakti. Is that correct understanding, and would you like to say something?
Radharani is there just to engage anyone in washing pots. You know, any devotional service. It's there for mercy. It's not, as you said.
Hmm. So both in
They help in different ways,
they help us in different
and
ways.
at every stage.
Can you say something?
Well, yes. It's a little technical, but your question is a little technical. One way to describe it is, there are three main potencies of Krishna: internal, external, and marginal. The internal energy, or spiritual energy, is called chit. And chit Shakti not has different sub-Shaktis, but have different features or aspects. Like the Absolute Truth has different features. So the Chit Shakti, or spiritual potency, has three features or aspects. Sandini. Balaram is the Lord of Sandini. Sambit. Vasudeva, Krishna, is the Lord of Chit. And Ladini aspect of the Chit potency is Radharani. So she's nourishing the transcendental, spiritual happiness of the living entity. But simply to engage the living entity in devotional service starts with Balaram. Now, it doesn't mean that Radharani is just like tapping her toe somewhere in the background waiting for someone to start devotional service. But that's a primary feature. And so she then also may act as spiritual master by engaging living entities, those that have forgotten, those that haven't forgotten, but engage, very compassionately engaging living entities in devotional service, in that way acting as spiritual master. And she draws the living entity toward Krishna in this blissful manner, or the spiritual happiness portion of the internal potency, or Chit Shakti. So they complement one another. They're functions that are played by both from the very outset and up to the stages of highest perfection. Now, there's things to be said about when Radha and Krishna are intimately engaged with between themselves and with the expansions of Radha, the gopis. Balaram keeps a respectful distance, but the mood of service comes from him, and she's nourishing that mood of service in her own way.
So, as Adi Guru, Lord Balaram can chastise us, but Srimati Radharani, her mood is different. She doesn't chastise us. She just
can
sees.
chastise us.
She does.
Oh, she can. She can. She can chastise Krishna, what to speak of us. Yes.
Yeah, again, thank you, Guru Maharaj, for a wonderful class. Yeah, your instruction about praying to Lord Balaram for determination and strength has been, I think, consistent in many classes over the last few months.
Yes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note of appreciation. I tried praying to Lord Balaram and I saw the shift in the quality of chanting personally. Of course, it's not perfect, but I still see some valleys and mountains of that, but yeah.
I emphasize it because it's something that's part of my experience. It's part of our teachings, core teaching. And you follow the core teachings, you experience something. So I repeat it because it's part of the spiritual experience. And those that do will have that spiritual experience themselves, as you're describing.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So based on that experience and in the classes I'm hearing, so of course the instruction is that it's the Guru's instruction which Lord Balaram represents. So that is our foundational carry forward into the spiritual realm, right? Yes, we have other relationships, Radharani, all different relationships, but fundamentally to just get over the modes and get more situated, fixed. It's
Well, your question is a little bit like Uttama Bhakta's question, that it's not, it sounds like you're saying, you're not saying it, but it sounds like he has his function inside of the bhakti. My statement is, it's not just sadhana bhakti. We don't graduate from the mood of service. It just blossoms. And that blossoming requires spiritual strength at every step. It's not like, I engage, it's not impersonalism. I engage with my spiritual master until I become liberated, and then I throw him away. Not so. That's not our impersonalism is not our teaching. That is the impersonal teaching. It's utilitarian up to a point, and then shalom. Thanks a lot. I'm moving on now. Bigger and better things. It's offensive and it's impersonal. So it's not a correct understanding. You have something for me?
Yeah, I had third question, Maharaj. It's been in my mind for many, many years when I ask it. Snake is not considered a very friendly or, rather a vicious
To be feared.
mentality and stuff. And Anant Shesh has that form of a snake where Lord rests and glories and all that. Is there anything to be said about that? Why that particular form, which is...
The why question, it's just his form. The perverted reflection is the simple answer. What's up is down, what's down is up in the perverted reflection. But that's his form. Why is Krishna blue?
But blue is beautiful.
There's other things that are beautiful, so why blue? It's just fundamentally that is his form. And this is the perverted reflection. This world is a perverted reflection. Why does the Lord assume the form of a half man, half lion, or a tortoise, or a boar, a hog? Is there a significance to him accepting the form of a hog? Everything comes from him, including serpents. Yes.
My understanding from your lecture is the spiritual strength from Balaram primarily comes to us through the medium of spiritual master.
And the medium of service.
Medium of service. And when you read about the descriptions of demons, Pralambasura, I could relate to some of the mentality that's mentioned in there. And to overcome that tendency, you mentioned that we need to pray to spirit.
Well, you recognize the tendency, you introspect and you recognize the tendency, and and let's just say you recognize the tendency and then there's residual tendency. And so you recognize the residual tendency, and then you deal with it. but you deal with it in a prayerful mood that, help in the mood of getting rid of the tendency and replacing it with a service tendency.
So I feel for doing that, I feel that the connection with the spiritual master is pretty important,
Yeah.
critical.
Utmost important, yeah.
I feel that in my relationship with my spiritual master, I feel, even though I'm trying to cultivate, I feel sometimes a pinprick that my connection is not so strong. Maybe this is because of my personality type, or, how do I know my connection is strong and how to improve it?
Well, how do you know when you're full? Someone doesn't have to tell you. You feel full. And if you're not feeling full, it means you're not full. Your question was, how do I know? And I'm giving the answer. You know from internal experience. And if you're not feeling that connection is what it could be, should be, would be, then, there are different responses to that recognition. One is to lament and become despondent, and then the other is, the same thing. Recognition and progress. The whole message of you most likely heard the Manashiksha seminar. It's the same thing. We had a whole retreat in Gitanagri on recognition and progress. Listen to those. So it's a theme. There's the humility of a Vaishnava, and it's not just self-deprecation. It's just acknowledgement of my shortcomings. And then there's hope. So this always comes up. And then what's the hope? The hope is, Balaram's ready. So then you, according to your, although in a weak condition, because like somebody that's not well is weak. So I'm in a diseased, not well condition, but I have to do something. So you do to your capacity, and you call out. So that's what we do. And some persons are stronger, and some persons I've seen some persons that are stronger. Something happens and they fade. Like what happened? And some persons just continue. Slow but steady wins the race. So you are what you are, and you're not what you're not, and you accept. That's the acceptance part. And then there's the progress part.
Does the personality type of a devotee, like my case, does it matter when you connect with spiritual master? Because
Yes and no. I mean, there's the shooting star phenomena. Some devotees go, shh. Where are they? Lots of those, right? I mean, the statistics are pretty substantial. Lots of those. And then, so, that's not a good option. So what are some of the other options? Whatever the personality type, there's something deep inside each one of us, and there's something that's deep inside in each one of us. You try to excavate that, and try to minimize the things that obscure that. Anukolyasya sankalpa. Pratikulyasya varjana. So that's what you do. It's not, can your personality type change is another question. The answer is yes. Someone that's a quiet introvert can become a big public speaker. While inside, there's leave them alone in a room, and they're a quiet introvert. But when service is there, something else comes out. So, the nature can change. Ultimately, the body that we have is resting upon the subtle body. We're awarded a gross body based upon the guna of the inclination of the subtle body. So the gross body conditions us, the subtle body conditions us, but we're neither of those. So we do those. We acknowledge this is the acceptance. This is my situation. I have this kind of whatever it is, personality, using the phrase you're using, and that's not me. So I have to work with the nature that I have, even knowing it's not me. And now using that psychophysical nature, like your occupation and your ashram and all those kinds of things. You acknowledge your psychophysical nature and you act in a theistic way accordingly, and internally you cultivate bhakti. And it can transform the outside. Carry one beyond the binding limitations of conditioning. That's bhakti. It has the power to transform. Yes, within limitations. Bhakti has the power to transform the limitations. The goal is not just to transform the limitations. The goal is to make that connection strong. And then look at our great acharyas, and their personalities are so different. And it's fantastic. They don't have to change their personality to be fantastic. They're fantastic. Some are like this, some are like that, some are like something else. It's the internal that's important. Yes.
This is regarding the strong sense of fruitive tendency, this as-like mentality which is shown in
Yes.
Yeah, so as we practice the sadhana bhakti, we feel there's so many layers as we introspect the conditioning part. So my question is, one of the instructions to pray to the Lord, and we see when we do heartfelt prayers there is reciprocation. Now to even maintain, there is such a strong sense of false shelters around us. So just to maintain a prayerful mood itself needs strength. So is it right to pray to the Lord just to get a strength to pray?
Sure. Sure. Hope against hope. Ashabandha.
Maharaj, when you were mentioning about Pralambasura and Dhenukasura, like those anarthas can be overcome by one's own effort.
With Balaram's help.
Yeah, by praying to the Lord, recognizing what we have, and then praying to the Lord. How about the...
And recognizing, praying, and striving to act not in that imperfect way or unpleasant way or contaminated way. Strive to act not like that, strive to act differently. To recognize, pray, and strive to act differently. Part of the prayer is, please give me the strength to consistently act differently, rather than for a short while I'm praying and then I get distracted again. Part of the realization of maturing in bhakti is that effort needs to be consistent, in fact, incessant. Because as soon as there is slackness, residual tendency continues. It kicks in again. The bhakti process is not to blame. It's our complacency and tendency to just do same old, same old. And for a while we try to do something that's more in alignment with what bhakti life really is. We do it for a little while. For some number of mantras, for example, or for whatever it is. We cultivate a particular improvement in our bhakti life. We may do it for some number of days. And then when that effort becomes cold, Bhakti Vinod Thakur's term, when submission becomes cold, then it reverts back to same old. You don't have to think about it, it just happens. Then it's an ongoing, literally non-stop. We're not there. Therefore we have sadhana for regulation, but the non-stop is spontaneous. What do you think?
Yeah, continuous effort.
Yeah. Guided by intelligence, with a desire, knowing that it's going to be intermittent. That's the acceptance part. Keep good association, execute with faith, try to be as consistent as possible, at least in the sadhana stage, the regulation stage. And then gradually.
So does this apply to the anarthas, other anarthas which are represented by the other demons killed by Krishna as well?
Yeah, sure. When there's spiritual strength, it expands like geometric circles outwards. Strength goes to those other areas too. Okay. Someone else had their hand up. Yeah.
So, Guru Maharaj, you're talking about how Balarama is the greatest spiritual master. So I had something related to that, actually. I was talking with one of my friends in school, and he just follows, he does a lot of demigod worship, he follows kind of everything. And he was talking about how finding a spiritual master is kind of celebrated in our movement. It's kind of like with the process of initiation.
In our movement.
In our movement, it's kind of celebrated. And he was basically asking me why, or he was like kind of processing his doubts that how can you ensure that spiritual master, even though it's coming from disciplic succession, how can you ensure that everything he says is completely following what the scriptures have?
You have to examine. This question is like a young man, I remember, I won't mention his name, how do I know that if I marry this woman, it's going to end out okay? How do I know?
But isn't it also that we have imperfect senses?
Well, yeah, yes. So the abbots are there. However, there's standards by which one can evaluate the answer to this question. Since we're imperfect, and all the other things that how do you know? Well, here's John Lennon's question to Prabhupada. It was asking the same. You know the history? John Lennon invited Prabhupada and some devotees to stay at his Tittenhurst place for a month. Prabhupada didn't stay there for a month because he was uncomfortable, but they stayed there for some time. And there's recording, and there's a transcription of the recording, where John Lennon is asking the same question 18 times, 15 times maybe. How do I know your translation is the best? Because everyone else, they say theirs is the best. So how do I know? How do I know? He kept asking, because he wanted to know. So that's good. And he probably gave different answers, and he still kept asking, which meant he didn't have faith. One of the answers that was kind of like definitive, Prabhupada said, if you find someone that their whole life is dedicated to Krishna, they're always talking about Krishna, they're always serving Krishna, their whole life is Krishna, 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 that person is the one who is going to give you the proper understanding of Bhagavad Gita. So how are you going to know that? You have to examine. There's symptoms. You taste sugar, and how do you know it's not salt? Because it's sweet. It's by symptoms. So by symptoms of one, what are the characteristics of a person? Because it's right in Bhagavad Gita. How do you know someone who's beyond the modes? How do I understand? There's 3 times. How do I understand a self-realized soul? And how do you get there? So the symptoms are there, and when you see the symptoms, then you know. Now supposing that person, your friend, can say, well, supposing you see symptoms, but there's some other symptoms you didn't see. Or some time passed and then that person kind of went kablooey. Because you didn't see everything, because this time was waiting for the kablooey. So for that time that they're acting in that way that is Krishna, 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 you got a good connection. But George Harrison's phrase is the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. How do I know it's good pudding? Taste it. Well, my senses are imperfect. Yes, true. Taste it. So that's part of the responsibility of an aspiring disciple, is to examine. It's part of the responsibility of a guru to examine the disciple. Examine doesn't mean, I'm testing you. It means, what are the symptoms? Do you know who Kastuba is? The monk podcast, do you know that one? Kastuba and Raghunath. Okay. Kastuba is the disciple of Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And I remember hearing him say, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was brilliant. And not only he was brilliant spiritually, he was street smart. So one time, Tamal Krishna Maharaj took Kastuba with him to go to do some shopping for a watch. And the man said, on this watch, this is crystal. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj held the crystal above the glass case and said, I'm going to move this crystal against the glass case. If the crystal scratches, then you are lying. And the man did. He watched the man didn't flinch. He said, okay, it's crystal. You test. You don't have to be a smart aleck kind of testing, but you by symptoms you know something. Prabhupada's statement Same question. 26 Second Avenue. How do I know who's a genuine guru? Prabhupada stopped the class and said, when you go to the diamond shop, the diamond district in New York, you better know what a diamond is, because otherwise they're going to cheat you. You come in, and you don't know what a diamond is, and they know that you don't know what a diamond is, they'll sell you broken glass. You have to have some fundamental understanding of what the symptoms are. And then you examine, according to what the scripture says, what the symptoms are. And then you can know. And you take some time. It's not a big rush, but you examine. Go back to their question. Supposing you examine, and you think you got the right answer, and then down the road you find out I got the wrong answer. Krishna will protect such a person. So ultimately the faith goes to Krishna, the perfect person. And Krishna is not going to cheat you. So I do my homework, I find out what the symptoms are, and examine. Not in a challenging way, but in a I want to know kind of way. I want to be sure. There was a time I was looking for an Ayurvedic doctor. My health was a wreck. So I checked, and I got 4 recommendations. So I saw each of the 4 people. And one of the 4 people I felt some connection with. And one of the first things he did, he was known to being really good at pulse reading. I said was because he's now deceased. So he checked my pulse. He said, do you have a pain in your right knee? I said, no. He said, you will. And years later, but it's not just because he was, boastful, or, there was a sense, he knew his stuff. And part of what he did was he helped people, his patients, understand he could cure diseases. Anyway, that's not numbers, it's, the effectiveness. Okay, anything else?
Guru Maharaj, extension of his question, just a very small. If I'm sincere, and I'm really sincerely looking for the connection with Krishna, then is it still possible that I may find a bogus guru?
Well, yeah, and then you'll understand he's a bogus guru.
But I'm very sincere.
That's all right, because you're very sincere, Krishna will help you understand in due course of time. Maybe, not, maybe immediately, maybe not immediately, but you'll understand. So the answer is Krishna will protect you. The sincere soul is protected by Krishna. And can there be a slip because I'm imperfect, etc.? Yes. Krishna will correct. He'll compensate because you're sincere.
Okay.
It's happened. You have something?
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, one more, and then we're going to wrap up.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. In the process of devotional service, there is this emphasis of effortless mercy. One tries their effort, and the mercy comes in. We hear that instruction.
You hear what's instruction? Effortless?
Effort plus mercy.
Effort
There is
plus mercy, yeah,
and
okay.
there's mercy.
Okay.
So that's from a disciple point of view, trying to do the genuine effort and
Yeah.
seeking the mercy of the Lord.
Yes.
Now I'm just trying to go the other side from a spiritual master, or like example, I'm comparing parenting, where the the bandwidth for our parents is limited. They have 1 kid, 2 kids, so we pray exclusively for the connection of safety of the child, and he grows spiritually connected and all that. So there's constant attention and prayer. So from a spiritual master's perspective, I'm just wondering, considering the bandwidth, like the spiritual master has thousands of disciples, he gives his mercy, he's constantly giving his instruction, association. It may not be, I don't want to say impractical question, exclusive prayer for looking at each disciple, oh, he's got this issue, let me pray to the Lord. I don't
I'm not sure what you're asking, but the short answer is Krishna gives inspiration. That the guru-disciple relationship or the guru function is in Krishna's hands. And Krishna gives an understanding and inspiration according to what he needs to know. And it's mystical, or it's not physically measurable. It's transcendental. It's a dynamic that exists in the instrument of Krishna between the living entity and Krishna. I'll give a little example that's different than your question, but it's similar. I was complimenting a particular devotee, and the feedback that I've received from those who have taken their classes. Specific, this and that feedback. And their answer was very simple. The answer was, somehow Krishna has helped this person. They're just like, they weren't zero, but they were invisible. Somehow Krishna spoke to this person, and some kind of Krishna's magic. And it wasn't cosmetic. And for that reason, they're able to touch the hearts of people better than someone else that may be a gifted speaker or whatever. So the transparency is the spiritual master-disciple function. And whatever it is that Krishna wants one to do and to know, Krishna will give that inspiration. Okay, Prabhupada ki jai.
Maharaj.
Yeah.